Hi everyone, this is Paul here for the Magdalene Centre. Today I'm doing the astrology report for the week commencing the 4th of July, outlining some of the key aspects for the week along with the themes that they highlight to us and giving a basic explanation for what they will mean. Now, before I go into the actual aspects, I just want to clarify that, as I always say, the astrology doesn't control us in any way, shape or form. It's merely a way of helping us to understand what the collective energies are doing, what kinds of themes they're highlighting for us to be learning from, and indicate different ways that we may experience it depending on how we choose to interact with the energies around us. But the energies don't make anything happen. That's dependent on the course of actions that we all collectively decide to commit to. Now, in terms of the astrology for this week, I'll start off with the moon as usual. So we begin with the moon in Pisces, so it's last sign of the zodiac, and this will be a time where I may feel need to do a bit of maybe meditating, just reflecting on the oneness of life, and just seeking to make um, spiritual experiences a part of everyday life. So we're connected with our psychic experiences rather than being disconnected and only occasionally feeling spirit. Then on Thursday, the moon will move into Aries, and this will be a time where you may feel more inclined to be taking action, to pursue goals, and just try and get things started rather than sitting around doing nothing. So you may feel that enthusiasm to get things done. On Saturday, the moon will move into Taurus. This will be a time when we may feel the need to slow down again, to get connected, get grounded, and maybe even spend some time in natural environment just to feel more calm and collected. And then on Monday, the moon will move into Gemini, and this will be a time where you may feel desire to connect with one another, to share ideas, to discuss situations, or to socialise with one another, and engage in stimulating conversations. In terms of the other aspects for this week, the first one and a key one is that Chiron will turn retrograde on Wednesday. So this week, with Chiron in Aries, this is going to be the start of a period of reflecting on or assessing what wounds we're holding on to. Specifically, where do we have a wounded sense of self as far as feeling disempowered is concerned. So part of this is looking at where do we wound ourselves through negative self-talk, through using limiting words after the phrase I am, because there is just the rebirth of the ego and it's about I am consciousness. With Chiron here, it's looking at the wounds to the I am consciousness. So where do we have a very limited sense of self, or where do we keep ourselves small by using very limiting definitions or self-destructive ones, like believing that we're stupid or believing we're not good enough. So we may say I'm not good enough, or I'm not ready, or I'm not clever enough to do that, or I don't know enough to do that. It's understanding where we're holding ourselves back, because at the end of the day we probably all have some kind of dream that we secretly want to achieve. The Chiron in Aries is asking us to look at what beliefs about ourselves hold us back, what stops us from taking the actions necessary to make things happen, and where do we nullify our sense of self-identity through basing it on limiting phrases rather than empowering ones. So how can we empower ourselves through changing our self-talk and using positive language after the words I am, so that we heal ourselves and have a greater degree of wholeness, and through healing the self and healing the ego, we become better able to pursue the kinds of actions required in order to achieve our goals, provided of course we make sure that the actions are also aligned with spiritual laws, so we're not creating karma for ourselves. Now, the other aspects this week, the main one is going to be a grand water trine between the Sun in Cancer, Jupiter currently retrograde in Scorpio but will be turning direct on the 10th, which is next Tuesday, and Neptune retrograde in Pisces. So in terms of the actual grand trine itself, we'll have an exact trine between the Sun and Jupiter on the 5th, and then an exact trine between the Sun and Neptune on the 8th. Now, with this grand trine in water, this is emotional energy and spiritual energy, as it were. So what we're looking at with the trine between the Sun and Jupiter is how can we develop a more expanded sense of self through clearing out the unconscious of old attachments, limiting thought patterns or obsessive emotional and thought patterns that's stored in the unconscious. So how can we expand our sense of self-identity through breaking down old limiting beliefs and empowering ourselves through removing old conditioning and buried or hidden triggers within our minds which cause us to have an almost explosive outburst if something happens to push a button. So it's deactivating the different buttons in our psyches through getting rid of old emotional patterns, whilst the trine to Neptune brings about the possibility to dissolve some of these structures. So Pisces energy is rather dissolving kind of energy, and Neptune retrogrades is making things very porous, so the veils of illusion are very thin at this point in time. So this dissolving energy also gives us the opportunity to dissolve the different layers of the ego that keep us operating from the conditioned sense of self rather than the true self. So this grand trine is an opportunity for us to achieve a great deal of healing and a great deal of transformation through both dissolving old patterns and also facing our own shadow and releasing any obsessions and any limiting factors. And we may find that forgiveness is a key thing we'll need to be focusing on this week, because this allows us to let go of old attachments, to dissolve them so that they're no longer holding us back, and this empowers us to transform our lives in a way where we're no longer tied to the past, we're no longer held back by our feelings about the past, we're living in the present moment, we're no longer looking back over our shoulder at the past, and we're not stressing about the future. We're in the present moment, and we're using that. By being present in our lives, we empower ourselves to take better courses of action and to become a better embodiment of things like universal love, compassion, empathy and psychic sensitivity. But for this to happen, we have to undergo the work of breaking free of old conditions in the deep unconscious, and also old habits and old conditioning. If we can let go of this, we empower ourselves going forward so that we can love freely and unconditionally, and and that love isn't dependent on the other person. We've learned how to love ourselves unconditionally, and as a result our cup is overflowing and we can love other people in the same way. The other thing I mentioned earlier was that Jupiter's going to be turning direct on Tuesday the 10th. So this brings an end to the Jupiter retrograde, but with Jupiter retrograde, the energy is all internalised at the moment. So all that transformational energy and that making the unconscious conscious. If we're not careful when Jupiter turns direct and the energy gets turned outwards again, we could end up projecting some of this onto other people and just ends up re-establishing old patterns. So it's important as ever at this point, when Jupiter does turn direct, that when things are going on around us, remember to breathe, that we don't just react straight away, we take a moment to reflect and we just focus on our breath for a moment if something triggers old emotional patterns, and rather than just spewing emotional poison back at whoever or whatever's caused the problem or caused the reaction, is taking that moment to step back, observe the reaction internally, and then remove the trigger, and then respond to the situation now rather than reacting. It requires us to be very mindful and observant of our internal responses to the situations around us, and also to make sure that we don't create karma for ourselves by spewing any emotional venom onto other people because we believe that person's hurt us, when quite often the case that person may not even intend to do it. They may not even realise there was a button there to be pushed, and we've then responded or reacted to that person rather than responding consciously. But that's something that we will have to work on ourselves all the time. It's not just at this time, but with Jupiter turning direct again and all that energy being moving outwards again rather than being turned inwards, we also need to be careful about what we say and how we respond to things, so that we don't create karma for ourselves. And the other thing that's taking place on the same day is Venus is moving out of Leo and into Virgo. So with Venus in Leo, we may have, in terms of love and values, we may have valued rather grand gestures in love, or constant adoration or admiration from people, being pampered. Whereas with Venus in Virgo, it's a much more down-to-earth and practical kind of love, and it's more, in terms of values, it's more about seeking that purification of the self, but it's also looking at showing love through acts of service rather than through grandiose gestures, and it's needing things or demonstration of love to be practical or to make sense, rather than be almost garish over dramatic displays of affection. It's a more reserved or refined kind of love, where it's no longer about grand displays of affection. It's more about the simple day-to-day acts of love that keep a relationship going. It's the simple things or the small things, and it's showing love through acts of service and helping one another, rather than through relying on extravagant displays of affection. But the flip side of this, we need to be careful that we're not being very critical of one another, because we're seeing the different flaws in one another, as it were. Because the thing is, none of us are perfect at human level. We all have human imperfections. It's part of human existence. So it's kind of, if we do have a tendency to criticise or judge, it's ask ourselves, why are we doing that? Chances are we're criticising and judging ourselves, and the other person is just a hook for that, because there comes a point where we can no longer criticise ourselves to the extent without projecting onto others. The more we become critical of ourselves, the higher the chance are we're going to start projecting that criticism onto others and start judging them instead, to try and avoid the pain of judging us, the self-judgment. So part of Venus' transit through Virgo will be about changing any tendencies we have to criticise loved ones, and instead see how can we embrace the other person's imperfections. Obviously, if what the person is doing is destructive or damaging, then that does need to be called out. But if they're just minor things that they're not exactly going to cause any harm, they just cause slight irritation, then that's the time we need to learn to become more compassionate or tolerant of the other person, and engaging in acts of service to help one another can often be an antidote to this, where instead of criticising other people, we try to give practical forms of love which are beneficial to that person. But obviously it needs to be in a way that isn't going to create any kind of dependency on us from that person. So it's empowering acts of love that are practical, make sense, and will help the other person, but at the same time it's not going to make them dependent on us or feel like they're not able to do things themselves because we're doing it all for them. It's kind of having that balance between helping other people but also loving ourselves enough to stay true to who we are, rather than just accepting anything or being indiscriminate. It's developing a more refined kind of love and helping one another in practical ways, because love is also practical. It's not just it's not just romantic actions. It can be simple things as well. So it's a fair amount to take on board, but I hope that's a useful guide for the week ahead. There's quite a bit for us to be dealing with, but I hope the report is a useful guide for what you can expect, and I hope you achieve much growth and transformation during this week, and a lot of release of the old. So may this week bring you many blessings. Take care.